I'm not always the best at taking victory laps. I know it's kind of a meme on the channel of all my wrong takes and things like that, but I do have my fair share of takes that have aged really well as well. But usually I don't really love to talk about it too much. I think it's a number of things. I think a big one is I just don't think it's that interesting for me to brag about a take I was right about. I might brag about it on a podcast or something, but in a YouTube video, you clicked on a Trevor Lawrence video, you want to hear me talk about Trevor Lawrence. Even this part of the video, you might find a little boring. But for Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville Jaguars, heading into the most recent season, people were talking about Lawrence as a potential MVP candidate. He was kind of a dark horse MVP pick, and I was a little cooler on that. I didn't love the idea of how much attention he was getting right away and how much people were just assuming he was going to be an elite quarterback simply because he, played horribly as a rookie and then pretty well as a second-year player, and of course was a very hyped-up draft prospect. Also, just with the Jacksonville Jaguars as a whole, just their entire team, I was always cooler on them. Jaguars fans were usually annoyed I wasn't putting them in the championship contender tier, even when they were competing for the 1 seed when I did my weekly tier list, because I was always a little lower on their receiving core as a whole, and I just didn't think they were a dominant team. So, perfect time to run a victory lap, right? The Jaguars fell off. They weren't very good last year. They missed the playoffs after starting off so strong. And Trevor Lawrence, I think a lot of people have soured on Lawrence. They viewed him as a much better player than he now currently is viewed. But another big part of why I don't love victory laps is I often feel they're undeserved or too early. In this situation, I don't necessarily think that Lawrence had a bad year. In fact, I think Lawrence had his best year as a pro last year prior to getting injured in about 17 different ways towards the end of the season. I do think if you look at basically his first 13 games versus the last 4, he was a completely different player. Like, for example, if we use PFF grades, which I get it, PFF grades not everyone's cup of tea, but let's just use it for an example. You kind of see that, that Week 13 game against Cincinnati, which is actually where we're going to get most of the footage for this film study from, you see that the grades were strong and prior were strong. The occasional missed step, a Colts game didn't go so well, a 49ers game didn't go so well. Granted, not a lot went well in that 49ers game for Jacksonville, but for the most part, was consistently good to great week in and week out. Then the final 4 games happened where he had 2 awful games and 2 still, solid games, but nothing special with kind of grades around the 70s. For me personally, when I watched every game that the Jaguars played last year, I didn't see a team that kind of got lucky to win some games early on and then weren't able to get stuff done as it went along. I didn't see an overhyped quarterback that we jumped the gun on a bit too quickly with Trevor Lawrence. I saw a quarterback that was doing everything he could to keep his team competitive and keep them really good, and then once he got hurt, the team just didn't have enough left to win many games. Let's get into some film now. Again, I know some people were waiting for this moment, but here we are, just talking to film, because we have to talk about what Lawrence really does well. What is the benefit of Trevor Lawrence? And there's something like this, where it's zone coverage, and you see the concept on the screen. It's a relatively simple concept, designed to get a player lined up as a tight end into a gap in coverage. It's that right there. That's where Lawrence is going to look towards. This is what Jacksonville wants out of Trevor Lawrence. Well, when the play begins, Lawrence runs this play action. It's pretty well executed by Cincinnati, making the throw right here, and there's a window. And it's a pretty solid window, too, right? I mean, you definitely have an opportunity to make this work. That's what Lawrence does, makes the good throw, they're able to get a completion. This is what the Jaguars like to do, and this isn't a super high degree of difficulty play. This is something that you kind of hope that your franchise quarterback can make these plays consistently, but it's not just these plays he can make consistently. There also were moments like this where it's going to be a zone coverage play and you have a receiver running a route over the middle that's going to, again, hopefully eventually get into a gap in coverage. However, this time when it begins, Lawrence runs the play action, is going to look down the field and fire down the field. Right here, it's nowhere near as open. And this is what I thought Lawrence did a really good job of last year and why I was really impressed with Lawrence as a player. You're going to see him be able to make that high degree of difficulty play. He fits it through a tight window. And this is The benefit of Trevor Lawrence going back to college was his great arm talent, how consistently accurate he can be. To me, he still, before the injury, showed that he could do this and probably was as good at doing this as he ever has been. I think better than he ever has been. I think this was a real strength for Jacksonville and a real part of how they were able to, at one point, be the 1 seed in the AFC for like an hour. But then there's even stuff like this, where he was able to branch off and make things happen, where the way this play is designed to work is zone coverage play. You have a receiver who's going to just try and, get open towards the outside. That's the route that he's running. For Lawrence, though, when he runs this play action, there's pressure and he's, in trouble. I mean, he is. He has to figure out a way to still make this play work. It's going to be difficult. But Lawrence is going to, go towards the outsides, throws, and is able to make a really good play, which, to me, this is something that hasn't always been Lawrence's game. Lawrence's game in college was very much, if things are going well, he can run the offense well. He can steer the ship, so to speak. And while I would still say that he is someone who is kind of, I don't mean this as the insult way that people tend to view it as. I would say he's more of a game manager. And what I mean by that is he's someone who tends to try to run the concept that the offense is running as well as possible, as opposed to abandoning the concept and moving on to try and do something else. But he can use his mobility and his arm talent to help out and still get extra value than what was already given. So again, not using game manager in a derogatory sense, although I'm sure someone will take it as that. As for the negatives, really, there aren't a ton. And this is always my question that I like to ask people when, some people will say things like, oh, Trevor Lawrence, I don't think he's that good. Well, my question is, what do you think he's not that good at? You have to have a negative trait, right? It can't just be, because his passer rating was down. Look at his receivers that were dropping touchdowns left and right. Of course, his passer rating is going to be worse than, someone who's in a better offense. To me, though, there is a negative. This is what I would consider the biggest negative is you see the route that he's going to want to look towards on this play. So Trevor Lawrence takes the snap. He does look in that direction, and he's going to fire in that direction. And right here, it's not really open. It's a tight window. I get I get the impulse to try and make this throw. I totally do. I mean, it's you're down 7 points. It's a 3rd down and 9, and it's there's 5 minutes left. I get it. To me, this is probably too big of a risk. That being said, it actually works out. He actually, it was a nice enough throw and really good catch there as well. So while I'm saying, hey, the receivers maybe weren't great, they weren't a disaster either. They made some plays. Good catch there. Hey, usually nice when your negatives are touchdowns. But, as a whole, I do feel like while he's gotten a lot better at this, there still is a bit of the I can make any throw-itis that you see out of him. That's, I think, a fair criticism to point towards. But as a whole, there really isn't a ton. He's a consistently good player that can manage a game well and also can get extra value using his legs if he needs to. Trevor Lawrence is a good quarterback. He's easily been worth a number 1 overall pick up until this point for Jacksonville. It's just he was probably overhyped because, of course, he was going to be overhyped. There was way too much expectations on him. Everyone brings up Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck only really had one elite season, and that was his last year. He was mostly just a quality quarterback, similar to how Lawrence has shown he can be. Peyton Manning's the rare exception of a guy who is given that much attention coming out of college and then lives up to the hype. Trevor Lawrence has honestly realistically exceeded what you should have reasonably expected him to do entering the league. It's just that people did not reasonably expect him to do much. They unreasonably expected him to do a lot, and I think that's kind of what's hurting him so much. But I don't know. I think I put him at 13th on my quarterback rankings list, and I would bet on him climbing that rankings list and being better next year as opposed to falling. So that's kind of my thing. No victory lap here, maybe in the future, but for now, that's what I think about Trevor Lawrence. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you, and of course, as always, thanks for watching.